If it's a bad meeting, it'll end very quickly. And if it's a good meeting, we're going to end up getting peace in the pretty near future, okay?
The meeting he's talking about is his historic summit in Alaska with Vladimir Putin of Russia. But what is a good meeting? And what would a bad meeting be? We'll discuss with a veteran diplomat who has met both of them and one of the best Russia watchers in the business on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Well, we're joined by Catherine Belton, Russia reporter for The Washington Post. Welcome back, Catherine.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Should we do a little plug for our old newscast about the rise of Vladimir Putin?
Why not?
We've just done it.
Yes.
And also Kim Darroch, Lord Darroch, former UK National Security Advisor and crucially British Ambassador to the US. Hello, Kim.
Hi.
Right, let's just get on the same page then about what we think is going to happen in Alaska over the next few hours. Catherine, first of all, what do you think about the location, the fact that this is happening in Alaska?
Oh, well, for Russia, it's rich with symbolism because, of course, Alaska used to be a former part of the Russian Empire until it was sold in, I think, 1760-something for 7.2 million. I think Russians have been playing up the idea that this was our territory. So this means that the US and Russia are natural partners and really we should be able to carve up the globe between ourselves.
I think it was actually in 1867.
1867. Sorry about that.
I've just Wikipedia'd it. And Kim, the fact that it's these two people meeting at all, I mean, you see different sort of time frames. Oh, the last time they met was this year. Oh, the last time a US president met a Russian president on Russian soil was even further back. What's a good sort of yardstick for the fact that they're meeting?
The last time these two met was in 2018 in Helsinki. And the last time the US president met his Russian counterpart was, I think, 2021. But I may be wrong on that. And look, these summits used to be, in the 80s, huge events which dominated the news for a long time and which were prepared over months and months. And they usually delivered big arms deals, SALT and START treaties and this kind of thing.
Basically arms reduction.
Cutting
nuclear weapons.
Which changed the face. Well, this one has been set up at about a week's notice. Everything I hear from both people who think they know what's going on in Moscow and friends who do follow what's going on in Washington say that both capitals are in meltdown because of the difficulty preparing this at such short notice. And while one of the two leaders is in many ways quite predictable, the other one is the master of unpredictability and chaos. But of course, it's the American who's the master, which is the opposite way around than you might assume.
Yeah.
And so because it's Donald Trump, it's just that bit much more difficult to predict.
And Catherine, I mean, there's been so much confusion on the road here. For example, Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, apparently misunderstanding what the Russians said to him last time he met them. And so we had 3 days of confusion about, was there going to be discussion about swapping territory in Ukraine with the Russians?
Yeah, it seems like what we heard was that he'd completely misunderstood what the Russians had said during his meeting in the Kremlin, that he thought a Russian offer to halt fighting in the key regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia in the south of Ukraine meant that Russia was going to withdraw. And it's astonishing to me that it took, one, that not only did he misunderstand, but then two, it took another 2 days for Russia to clarify and say, actually, no, what we meant was just we're ready to halt on the current front line, but there's no way that we're going to give up territory there. And we want, in return, the whole of Donbass, which is Russia's very Ukraine's very strategically important eastern region, which is key for industry and key for Ukraine's future defense. Ukraine has invested huge amounts of materials into building defenses there so that Russia can't strike back. So if Ukraine were to give up that entire area, not only would it be a huge infringement of its sovereignty, but also it would leave the door wide open for Russia to reinvade and take more in a few years' time. So yeah, it was a big mess. And it sounds like that Trump was that misunderstanding was the cause for Trump's excitement, for his statements that, oh, yes, we can do territorial swaps. We're going to get back for Ukraine some prime oceanfront territory. Because Kherson, Zaporozhye is that prime oceanfront territory. But since that was all clarified, Trump has really had to wheel back and start playing down expectations.
So, Kim, let's just talk about some of the things Donald Trump has said in the last few hours and the last few days. One of them was, there's a 25% chance of failure at this summit. How would you interpret that? Well, with all the caveats that come from interpreting anything that Donald Trump says.
Just one tiny comment, if I may, on the oceanfront, prime oceanfront territory. That's so American real estate stuff, isn't it? And you can tell that both Trump himself and Witkoff are real estate guys when you hear that kind of language coming out.
Because it's not diplomacy, is it?
Not diplomacy, no, exactly. No, I never used the word oceanfront property, in my time in body audit. Anyway, look, it's gone backwards and forwards to a bewildering degree, which leaves all of us just watching it, justifiably puzzled about just what expectations are. Most recently, after the Europeans ganged up and talked to Trump at that virtual summit, the message coming out of the White House was it's going to be a listening exercise, and calmed it all down. This morning there was a post from Trump saying high stakes as he was setting off, which is kind of winding it all up again. So, and this comment about 25% chance of failure. For me, the likeliest outcome by far is you simply get an agreement to another meeting, they might call it a formal process, but another meeting is about as much as I can see coming out of this. Plus, maybe some provisional deal or at least outline of some sort of economic agreement over maybe rare earths or whatever, because it's striking that Trump is taking along both his Treasury Secretary and his Trade Secretary, who wouldn't normally be participants in a summit if it were just about the Ukraine war. So that's how it looks from here. But again, the master of unpredictability and chaos, he may have something up his sleeve to surprise us. Although if he does, and if there is some startling announcement about the outline of a deal coming up, boy, will that set the dovecots fluttering in European capitals and in Kyiv.
Yeah, Catherine, it's interesting the last few days, all the focus seems to have moved on to talking about other things that aren't Ukraine, as Kim was just suggesting there.
Yeah, and that's another Russian tactic, because what they really want is to sort of normalize relations with the US and kind of start talking about restoring relations. The Deputy Foreign Minister, Andrei Ryabkov, has been saying, well, we'd really like to get an agreement on restoring flights between Russia and the US. And they are set to sort of dangle deals as well about sharing resources for Arctic cooperation and so on. And it's kind of like they want the world to forget about what they're doing in Ukraine so they can quietly continue their invasion and go deeper and deeper into Ukraine. And in the meanwhile, get the US on side so that Donald Trump maybe forgets about, sending any more weapons to support Ukraine or his threats to impose ever greater sanctions on the Russian economy, because Russian economy right now is in quite a dire state. So really, Putin's task is to do everything he can to make Trump forget about that.
I mean, Kim, re-establishing flights between Moscow and Washington, D.C., that doesn't sound like the end of the world diplomatically to me. But do you agree with Catherine's theory that actually every kind of inch of rapprochement between the two is bad news for Ukraine?
Yes, and it's also very good news for Putin. Remember, he was, until Trump's arrival in the White House, an international pariah. I mean, if he comes to the West, he should be arrested when he touches down. This is probably the most sanctioned country in recent history, and he has done absolutely nothing to deserve where he now is, about to go to a summit that with the American president that will be the most watched event on the planet, which is hugely prestigious for him. His demands still are all the territory is captured and a bit more. Ukraine gives up any ambitions to join NATO, and maybe Ukraine also has to disarm. So nothing to move towards any sort of resolution of this, and he gets his summit with the American president. So it's a huge, huge concession, a big diplomatic success already for Putin.
In terms of the choreography, do we know what format the meetings are in? Who's meeting who, when, for how long, and who they'll have with them?
We know already that Putin and Trump are going to have a one-on-one, which has everyone kind of sort of shaking their heads already. They will have their own interpreters with them, so it's not like some previous Putin-Trump meetings when Trump has gone to meet Putin with only the Kremlin interpreter present, or gone with his own and then told his interpreter to basically rip up the notes and not brief anyone on what was discussed. I mean, that's happened in the past. So they'll have the one-on-one, and that really plays to Putin's strengths. He really does believe that he has the ability to charm Trump, that he's done so in the past, and we could see some element clearly of that in the 2018 Helsinki summit, when after these long talks with Putin, Trump emerged sort of almost overwhelmed and very deferential to Putin. And he was talking about, how suddenly he was taking Putin's view and his denial of Russian interference in the 2016 election,
which
over
put him at odds with his own intelligence agencies.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've had not a great track record of prior Putin-Trump one-on-one meetings. But after that, they will have a meeting with kind of the delegations. So there will be a meeting with including the finance ministers and the defense ministers, and as well the national security chiefs and foreign secretaries. So that will be quite a full-on meeting. But sort of going back to what Kim was saying, I think it's definitely the case that, even in Russia, in the Kremlin, they've been frantically preparing for this summit. No one was really, I think they've been preparing over several months, but the fact that this was going to happen now has kind of sent them into a flurry. And they've got kind of 4 different proposals on the table. They are trying to meticulously prepare, but compared to previous events, it is a little bit on the fly.
Kim, talking about whether Trump is charmed by Putin or not. I mean, in the last few weeks, he sounded a bit less enamored of him. For example, a couple of weeks ago, he was saying, he strings me along, or he says nice things about a peace deal and then bombs a nursing home in Kyiv. That doesn't sound like Trump is quite so starry-eyed anymore. Yeah.
Again, it come back to Trump's unpredictability. Catherine is absolutely right about the Helsinki summit. I mean, almost the most abiding thing about that summit was not anything they said, or Trump said some extraordinary things. It was Trump's submissive, deferential body language with Putin, a look that I've not seen between him and any other global leader. So there was something extraordinary about that summit, and about how Trump is with Putin. And in terms of where we are now, you're right, he has been much tougher in his language on Putin than almost any time I can remember while he's been in power, certainly much tougher at any point in his first term. But he was threatening all sorts of things, including potentially secondary tariffs, secondary sanctions on countries that buy Russian oil. And he's been quite tough with India on their tariff regime. So it looked like he was toughening up. And then what suddenly happens? He agrees to a summit without conditions, without requiring Putin to do anything in terms of promising an unconditional ceasefire or whatever. So it flips back. So the dial, the needle swings wildly from one side of the dial to the other.
And Trump is going to do a big news conference at the end of this, isn't he? We don't know what Putin's going to do. It doesn't seem like Putin kind of does these kind of ad hoc press conferences. He prefers like a big, grand 4-hour news conference behind a big table, doesn't he?
I think they are going to do a joint press conference.
Really?
I think that's been announced. So again, there's potential for a repeat of the previous disastrous performance in Helsinki, when you did have that body language.
In terms of the theatricality, I mean, a lot of our focus on that has been around Trump because that's what he does. But there's a bit of theatre on the Russian side as well. And I'm thinking of Sergei Lavrov, the veteran foreign minister, turning up to this meeting or turning up to Alaska this morning wearing a Soviet Union T-shirt or sweatshirt. What's going on there?
Yeah, that's quite a bit of posturing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big signal to everyone that, we're on the stage, we want to be back and considered as an imperial power. And it's certainly a big sign to anyone who thinks they're going to give up any of the territory that they've acquired in Ukraine, because that's clearly a signal that Ukraine, it's ours. We are the Soviet Empire. So, everyone thinks that maybe Lavrov is trolling a bit, but it's certainly the image that they want to portray.
I'm sure he's trolling. I'm sure that's very deliberate. I mean, Lavrov has, to put it at its kindliest, he has a mischievous sense of humour, Lavrov. And it usually comes out in him belittling his foreign minister colleagues, quite often at their joint press conferences, but that will be deliberate.
Yeah. And it's interesting, though, because Trump, one of the things he said yesterday was, I'll know within 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes if this is going to be a success. I wonder if he sees that picture of Lavrov wearing the Soviet Union T-shirt and goes, all right, it's already a disaster. It's that revealing, isn't it?
Well, you would
About their
hope
intentions and their attitude to this whole thing.
you would hope not, and you would hope that even though Trump has essentially given already a massive concession by awarding this summit, you would hope that he doesn't forget that actually he does have enormous leverage over Russia right now because of the economy. And I think that's the reason why Putin wants to wave things at Trump to distract him. But it's key for Putin now to keep Trump on board and prevent him from imposing these tougher secondary sanctions on Russia's trading partners like India and China, because you can see the Russian economy is really starting to falter. And you had all these Russian officials at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum in June just basically giving warnings that we're in a pre-default situation. We could be facing a string of bankruptcies in the quite near future. And, sanctions have caused inflation to spiral. The central bank has ratcheted up interest rates to try and rein that in. But as a result of these 20% odd interest rates, there's a wave of non-payments. Companies are struggling to pay debts. And then in August, just as Trump was threatening the increasing sanctions, which basically cut Russia off potentially from its key oil revenue, because it's mostly selling oil now to India and China. Because of that, at the same time you had VTB, the second biggest Russian state bank, announcing that already essentially its corporate lending business is collapsing and its revenues fell like 49% in the first half of the year. And there's this great sense of unease now in the Moscow elite because, their expectations were raised that they were going to have Trump on board, they were going to do a deal, sanctions were going to get lifted. But in fact, it's been getting worse. And the Europeans had done a good job on getting Trump on board until very recently, that he should kind of exert greater pressure over Russia. So, it's all to play for today at this summit.
But that's interesting, though, because the vibe up until now has been that, the sanctions aren't tough enough, or the Russians and their trading partners are able to get round them, and that actually the Russian economy is proving surprisingly resilient and isn't on the verge of collapse. But it sounds like those things are no longer true.
I think inside Russia, people are increasingly worried because they are getting into increasingly choppy waters. And there is this sense that, if Trump... So the one economist told me that if sanctions remain at current levels, oil prices at current levels, then yes, Russia can sustain its war for another 18 to 20 months. But the minute you get oil prices falling, or you have Trump threatening these much tougher sanctions, and already there have been tariffs imposed on India, which is now a key channel for Russian oil sales, and these potential threat of additional tariffs on India and China for continuing to buy Russian oil, then that really changes the picture quite drastically. And so we heard as well that when Trump was on the call with the European leaders on Wednesday, he said one of the reasons why Putin agreed to meet him was because of this threat of additional tariffs. It's really got them worried. So, yeah, could change things. And Trump himself said, I think just last week, he said, look, if oil prices drop for $10 for a prolonged period of time, then Russia will have to stop the war.
I mean, Kim, is that the sort of incentives that Putin responds to? Because it seems to me he's got he's driven by bigger forces than conventional leaders who would respond to an economic threat like that.
Yeah, I mean, what Catherine has described is exactly what the best Russian analysts, inside governments, I think, are thinking about this. And I've heard this 18 to 24 month prediction before things really fall apart before, and I think it's compelling. The known unknown here, though, is Putin's calculation of how much pain the Russian people can take before he really starts to feel he has to change things. And when you think that Russians have already taken more than 1 million casualties, killed and seriously wounded in this war, and they are winning very, very slowly, they are advancing very, very slowly. So if the war was to continue, who knows how long it would take for them to actually achieve the objectives, then it's quite hard to calculate how much pain Putin thinks can be taken. But the coming economic crisis is real for him.
Let's talk about the people who aren't there. Vladimir Zelensky, first of all. I mean, has he done all he can do this week to try and influence an event that he's not invited to?
I don't think there is much more he can do. I mean, obviously, he looks like he's under tremendous strain. And I guess you would be if your country's fate was being decided in a faraway country without you. Trump is obviously trying to sound optimistic that there could be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin even straight after. But I would say put the odds at that as very, very slim indeed, because Putin doesn't want to confer that legitimacy on Zelensky as a leader and as an equal. So, I don't think there's much Zelensky can do. I mean, clearly Europe has rallied around him. But, there's not much more he can do. And really the picture that Putin will be trying to present is that Ukraine is losing, there's nothing more that you can do, and it's senseless for you to keep supplying weapons. So wouldn't it be better for us to take all this territory, not have any security guarantees, and you can present this to the public as some great peace deal and get your Nobel Prize?
And Kim, what's your take on what the other European countries, including Keir Starmer, have been doing this week?
I think they've done as good a job as they could have done in trying to set some parameters and some guardrails for Trump in his meeting with Putin. And I think some of what you saw earlier this week in terms of Trump talking about it being a listening exercise, I suspect is a response to the amount of pressure he has felt from the Europeans. But in the end, this is Donald Trump. He's Mr. Unpredictable. And if he sees in his own mind some prospect of a breakthrough in his conversation with Putin, then I'm not sure that what the Europeans have said to him is going to be a real block to him. If I could just make one other point on this. In part because Trump and Witkoff are both real estate guys, there's a lot of talk about land as if this were the key to it all. But it's important to remember that the fundamental objective here for Putin, unless Catherine corrects me, isn't really about a chunk of Ukrainian territory. It's about a client government in Kyiv that points eastwards, that is not going to try and join NATO, not going to try and join the EU, that can be relied upon like Belarus as a sort of part of a new Russian empire. And so if that's his objective, remains his objective, it's really much more about Ukrainian sovereignty than about slivers of land being exchanged or whatever. And on that issue, first of all, it worries me that Trump doesn't seem to get this and he thinks it's just about land. That is indeed his position. And second, if I'm right on that, they're a huge way apart, because I think the never joining NATO, always, an ally of Russia stuff is the key for this for Putin. He's not going to give that up.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think Putin thinks perhaps, well, if he can somehow sway Trump into thinking that this is a great deal, that he can have this so-called ceasefire, but in the meantime, let Russia run away with East Ukraine and the Donbass region, then without any proper security guarantees, which Putin is not going to agree to, that just leaves the way open for Russia to come back later and then take more territory. So I think Putin would be very happy if somehow he managed to bamboozle Trump into saying, oh, right, we've got a great deal. Let's force Ukraine to give up its territory in the east. I've got a ceasefire. But a type of deal like that isn't worth the paper that it's written on, because, Russia can just come back and reinvade. And Zelensky and Europe aren't going to agree to it. So again, Trump might think, okay, so I've got a good deal here. But, but he can't enforce it unless he has Zelensky and Europe on board. So it's going to be very tricky.
Now, I feel we've kind of done this, but this is just a rhetorical device to end this episode. I want one of you to paint the best case scenario that we wake up to on Saturday morning, and somebody to paint the worst case scenario we wake up to on Saturday morning.
As Lord Kim was saying before, the best case scenario is that, Trump holds his nerve. He doesn't allow himself to be swayed by Putin. He listens to what the European leaders has told him. And, we wake up tomorrow morning and find that the two men have had perhaps a good conversation, but Trump is still frustrated by the fact that Putin clearly doesn't want to stop the war, and he's still continuing his bombing campaign. So if we continue with these threats to impose greater sanctions, then Ukraine and Europe will be in a much better position at the end of this.
Worst case outcome is that Trump surprises us all and comes out and he says, we have the outline of a deal. I tried, but I couldn't persuade Putin that he should do anything much in the way of land swaps. And of course, we already all know that Ukraine is never going to join NATO. But there is peace on offer. We can end this terrible war. 1.5 million casualties already. We can stop the killing. The 7 million refugees can go back. But we now have to persuade Vladimir Zelensky that he has to basically accept losing that territory in the east and accepting that Ukraine is going to be neutral in future, but he can have peace. And then it's really difficult, that not just because it's impossible for Zelensky, but I don't think you can guarantee European solidarity in rejecting that. I think that there are countries openly that would support it, like Hungary and Slovakia, but there are also leaders who've had enough of this war, who've had enough of the 7 million refugees on their territory, enough of the economic damage, and would take anything, privately would take anything to stop this war. So that's the real risk out there.
And that's so interesting, because then you realise the diplomacy on Wednesday of all those European leaders getting on the video call with Macron and Starmer and Merz is to keep them all on the same side
also,
in advance, in preparation for what inevitably might or might not happen, rather than using it as a pressure thing on Trump. Fascinating. How diplomacy works. Catherine, for your job, you're going to stay up all night, because the time zone is really annoying for people in Britain, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Because Alaska's so far west, so a long night for everyone.
Yeah, we have to work very late tonight.
Okay, well, Catherine, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
And Kim, thanks to you too.
Thanks.